Welcome to the Healers Café, conversations on health and healing with Dr. Manon.
So welcome to the Healers Café. And today I have Dr. Sharon Grossman, and she's the founder of the Exhausted to Extraordinary method. It's a 3-step method to unblock your mind, reshape your thinking, and return the joy to your work in 90 days. Now, as a psychologist, coach, and author of the international bestseller, The 7E Solution to Burnout, Dr. Sharon works with 6-figure executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals in high-stress industries who are struggling with anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout. So my first question to you, how are you not going through that nowadays when everyone is burnt out and struggling, full of anxiety?
Yeah. Well, thank you for, first of all, having me on the show. And it is so true that nowadays people are experiencing so much more of this than even before. And I find it kind of ironic because, prior to COVID, everybody wanted to work from home. It was everybody's dream and it was every employer's nightmare. And now it's like the norm and people are freaking out and they want to go back to the office and they are burning out in droves. And I think that part of the reason for that now is because people haven't really thought this through. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is there's no delineation between work and your personal life. So people are getting emails and they're just used to working out of their house. So they're just working all day long and they're working many more hours than they were before. And so I think that it always comes back to this idea of like, where do you draw the line? And being really intentional about how you live your life, And so I would say that for me, it hasn't been as big of a change because I was, for the most part, working from home prior to this. Right. And so it's, and the other thing is there's a difference between being an employee and being a business owner as well. Yeah. So there's just like a lot of changes and there are a lot of differences, but I would say on the whole, you have to love what you do.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
It's really important, and I think that we were talking about how long people work. I think that if you love the work that you do, it doesn't really matter how long you work because you're going to burn out much less. You're going to feel less stress about it. You're going to have fun. Mm-hmm. It feels like play. Like it's something that you would do on your day off because you love it so much. You would do it even if you didn't get paid because you love it so much, right? Mm-hmm. It has a different flavor. It doesn't affect us in the same way. So I think that plays a big role in it. And so you have to look at what you're doing and what your relationship is with your work. And when you actually can step away from your work and focus on other things, so you have a little bit more varieties in your life of like, I work and then I play, or I work and then I socialize, or, I focus on my health, I focus on other things. There's got to be a little bit more balance for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's true of entrepreneurs as well, because but stress affects us differently if you love what you do. So it is it's very subjective. So I completely I agree with you. I think too what I've seen that many people have issues with is what to do with their children if they have children, and it's just the actual management of their time and their availability, and very different circumstances when you also can't socialize, which I think many people took for granted. Whereas a lot of entrepreneurs, they're kind of used to being, lone leaders, and they're, it's a different mindset. You might go, to some big meetings or things like that, but you're not in the daily, meeting in offices and that type of thing. So it's a big change for so many people. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other piece you were asking about anxiety is,
Yeah.
I think we saw that a lot in the beginning of COVID, because COVID brought with it so many changes and so much unpredictability and uncertainty that people were really stressed out about that. People like to know what's coming. They like to predict, they like to control. And when all that goes out the window, you see anxiety really rising. And then, of course, over the last year, we've had all kinds of really dramatic events happening, you know, in politics and culturally,
Right.
with like, you know, Black Lives Matters and like the women's movement, and like so much has happened that I feel like the other thing is that you have these things that happen, but I also think that there are some people that are more prone to anxiety. And I have clients like this, right? And what I find is that they're really anxious about this one thing, and then that thing gets resolved, and it's not like they're fine. It's like, then they find the next thing to be anxious about. And then they're like, oh my God, but what about this? And it's like, and then they just keep moving on to the next thing and the next thing, and the next thing. And then it's like, you guys take a step back and really look at like, what is happening in your mind.
Well, I mean, hormonally, it's also it's a bit of an addiction, right? You get used to the hormones that are produced when you're in anxious states. And it's like, even though the mind can say, well, that's done, the body craves another sort of drama or something to go into, right?
Yes. You said it. That's the word. That's the D word. I talk about that a lot of drama.
Yeah. So how did you get into, well, I mean, to become a psychologist, or what was your desire to help people in this way?
Yeah. So it's funny because I talk about this a little bit in the book, where when I was growing up, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But what I did know is that I wanted to find something that I was going to be passionate about. And I think that's part of the reason why I was struggling so much, because I was like, I got to find what that is. Right. And I just didn't know. It wasn't like some kids, you know, when I was growing up, they're like, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a doctor, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
I didn't have that. It wasn't like, that's my calling. And from the time I was 5, I always knew, you know? And so I was really like searching for myself. I was trying to find what that was going to be. And I did a lot of exploration, and I really was fascinated by the world of psychology and like the psyche, the mind, and just the power that it gives us when you understand what's running the show, and you can kind of use and apply all these tools that are now taught, how it can dramatically shift your life. And I thought, you know, this is meaningful work. And it just fit really well because I'm somebody who likes to help other people. And I'm really driven. Like there's this passion about like the transformation that you see with people when they come to me and they're like depressed and they're stuck and there's all this kind of like low energy and heaviness, and then they walk out and they're able to really thrive in their life. Like there's something really magical about that. And I was like, I could dedicate my life to that. You know?
Yeah. And so because many times people go into healing also because of something that they have had to overcome, or something they wanted to help others with directly, you know, a family member or something like that. So that's why I was curious. You've been doing this for 19, 20 years now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So for you, it wasn't an immediate, it was like you were still finding something, and then you discovered this basically.
Yeah.
As a way. So it wasn't your own health issues or concerns.
Yeah, I think that's what, you know, when I talk to a lot of people in podcasts and different business owners and things, and I find that almost always they're looking for that story of like,
Yeah.
What happened to you? And now you're like helping other people with that same thing. And I always feel like I don't fit into this model.
I get
I'm
you.
the one who had the burnout and now I'm helping everybody with burnout, or I had the trauma and now I'm helping everybody with trauma. Like it didn't work that way in my case, at least. And there's nothing wrong with it when it does happen that way. I think there's a lot of value that people bring from their own experience, but I think I bring a different kind of value to people. And that is coming from that place of resilience and teaching them things that maybe they can't see, right? Like that blind spot that we all have, and be able to come in and say, like, these are the patterns that I'm seeing. And here are some things that can really help. Or just eliciting things from them. Like sometimes I'll do an exercise with a client and, and for some clients, they're just like rolling with it really quickly. And other people get really stuck because they have a hard time accessing parts of themselves. And so to have a conversation with somebody else is really great, because then like I'm able to see things about them and like reflect that back to them, and they're having these insights, and then things start to fall into place, So
yeah, no, anyway, I laugh at my question because I'm actually in the same kind of predicament. It's I chose to do my my career in naturopathic medicine, and it's only while I was a doctor that I ended up becoming sick and having to deal with mindset issues and physical issues. So it didn't come the other way around. But I'm just so many people, it's not like that. It's so that's why I asked the question, just curiosity.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But I think there's something to be said for being intentional about how you kind of drive in your life, and I kind of chose this path very intentionally.
Yeah.
And that was to get into psychology. And then I kind of shifted more into coaching. And even that was really intentional because it was about having greater reach and about who I want to work with and what struggles they have and what can I help them with the most. And so I really kind of designed my work and my business around these key questions, like really being intentional about that, because I think that's important to really sit down and think about these things, because we spend so much time working, it might as well be a good fit and something that we're passionate about.
Yeah. And what I see too is we create what we want, right? So if we want to create solutions for a certain people that we want to work with, we better really want to work with the people that we're serving, right? So if we do it sort of haphazardly, you're going to end up with people that you're not as connected to. And I think that's where the connection of, if you've experienced it, there's a automatic connection because you've gone through it.
Sure.
But when you're picking a group of people that you feel your service can really help, like in your case, those with anxiety or overwhelm or even burnout stages, I think is that because you feel that those are the people that all of the methodologies and what you use as a coach and as a psychologist, you can help them the most? Or what's the thinking for your choice there, since we're talking about true choice?
Yeah, well, I think when I was working as a therapist, I didn't really have a choice. It's like whoever showed up and whatever they were dealing with. And oftentimes they were dealing with a number of things. But I've had all these years of experience of working on all different kinds of issues. So then it was like, okay, well, now with coaching, I can actually like really niche down and I can really focus in on a set of problems or on a set of the population. And I really love working with high achievers, because I can totally relate, because I'm kind of a high achiever too. But I'm kind of a different high achiever in the sense that I'm not a perfectionist, which a lot of high achievers are. And I'm not a procrastinator. And I I don't have imposter syndrome, and I'm not a people pleaser. And so those are the things that I see in a lot of the people that I work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I have the tools to help them. And I don't have to be in it with them to be able to do so. Right.
Right.
It was just kind of saying, like, what are the patterns? What are the things that people are struggling with? And how can I take all the things that I know really help from like all of the mindset training, and help them to really shift their relationship with themselves and with their work.
Mm-hmm. So can we take one of them as an example? Would you be up for discussing that? Okay. So I train a lot of naturopathic doctors, medical doctors in Bowen College, where I teach a natural pain elimination technique. And one of the things I have noticed, and I'm not a perfectionist either, I just like to get things done. That's why I don't procrastinate. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's like, okay, fine. We just course correct, right?
Sure.
But I am surrounded by perfectionists.
Mm-hmm.
And the more degrees they have, the harder it is for them to trust themselves to do something so simple. Like what I teach is super simple compared to the degrees that they got to get there.
Yeah.
So how do you break down a mindset? I know everyone's individual, so I'll preempt it that way. But what have you seen to be an effective way to crack that nut, as they say?
Well, this is what I teach, right? Whatever your pattern is,
mm-hmm.
there is some sort of a belief underlying that pattern.
Right.
So I was going to say perfectionism is a behavior,
mm-hmm.
but it stems from an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Typically it's a fear of failure. And that emotion stems from a certain way of thinking. And it's usually some sort of a worried thought. Like,
mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. I have a executive that I'm working with, and she's definitely a perfectionist, and she is in a very high role, and she's been doing it for years and years, but she's still got that imposter syndrome, and she's still definitely perfectionistic. And so like for her, it took a lot to get her to click send on the emails.
Mm-hmm.
She would like write an email to the company, which she would have to send out every Monday, let's say. And she would read it over like 8 times, like over and over and over and over, and just like keep going and keep going. Because she was so afraid that she would mess something up in that email, and she would send it and it would be like this catastrophic, like embarrassment. And that always came back to that imposter syndrome of like, then they'll realize that I'm not really that great and they'll fire me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like that fear of embarrassment and the fear of failure and the fear of rejection, all the things. Right. And so I feel like that's usually, there's some sort of a fear underlying that perfectionism. Either the fear of being found out, like that maybe they'll realize that I'm not that great. And typically and this is what I tell people who have imposter syndrome more often than not are their harshest critics, and they see themselves as a lot less than what other people see them as.
Yeah.
And because they can't see themselves through other people's lens, and they only see themselves through their own lens, they project all of their own stuff onto other people. And then they assume that other people see them the way that they see themselves. So it's really hard for them to break out of this pattern, because they're like, everybody sees me like this. Of course, this is how it is, because that's all they know.
Right.
And sometimes they know on a rational level, where like, I know I'm good. I know that people like me. I know that all this stuff, right? Like I've gotten all the promotions, but like they still are stuck in that emotional bind, that fear. And that comes from the belief.
Right.
That's kind of the underlying mechanism.
Yeah. The belief, or I would imagine also sometimes an incident or an early childhood interpretation of something, would you think? Or
well, that's what leads to the belief.
Yes. Okay. There we go.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have these early life experiences, which creates this programming in our subconscious mind,
right.
These beliefs that then drive the rest of the mechanism. So, and that's why I do a lot of reprogramming for people, because I teach in in my model, I'm really focusing mostly on helping people think differently. Right. And so I think that's an important place to be, so that as things are happening in your everyday life, you're learning how to manage your mind. And
hi, I'm Dr. Manon Bolliger, and I wanted to take a moment to thank you for watching these podcasts. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Also, feel free to leave comments and like it. This way more people get to find out about this work and about other choices for health. So I think it's really important that we all share this information. I have a free gift to you. It's a 7-sequence email that has tips for every day, and it's a little insight about how to live your life when it comes to health. And it's very much built on how I managed to overcome stage 4 cancer and what it took. So I would love you to have this, and thank you once again for listening to these podcasts.
And that can help you not to feel so anxious, because anxiety is a result of a lot of thoughts about the future, about things going wrong, about all the worst case scenarios coming true, and like, oh my, what if this happened, and what if that happened, and like, right. And then if you can manage that and you don't just go on autopilot, then you can actually shift out of that anxiety, and then you're not avoiding things, or you're not procrastinating, or whatever the behavior is, right? So it usually is like this trickle effect of thoughts lead to your emotions, lead to your behaviors. So that's what I teach, because I think it's important for day-to-day stuff as it's happening. But then I also teach some of the deeper work, which is about reprogramming your subconscious mind so that your filter is different. So, right. Because this is what I always explain to people. Like, people often think the reason I am stressed, the reason I'm burned out, the reason I'm anxious is because this thing happened, right? Like COVID happened, or I got fired, or I'm getting divorced, or something happened. Right. And what I teach them is that there is actually an intermediary step in between their circumstance and how they feel. And that is their thoughts. Right? What's their interpretation? What kind of meaning are they assigning to the circumstance? That's going to determine how they feel. And that's actually really good news, because then we have a choice, right? And you can kind of reverse engineer the results that you want to create in the world, and how you want to feel can determine what thoughts you kind of insert into that equation, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. No. So, but you're doing it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just getting to understand it. But so cognitively, as in you're getting people to understand and then reverse engineer and go, okay, now I have this thought. All right, I remember this belongs to this. Okay. And let's course correct. Is it this way, or is it working with the like how is it that you're addressing the subconscious component of that?
Okay, so there's two different things.
Okay.
Right. So we can work on the conscious mind, which is saying, like, become self-aware of your self-talk. Yep. Notice the thoughts that are going through your mind and how those thoughts lead you to feeling the way that you do and behaving in the way that you do. So if you're a perfectionist, right, we kind of rewind the tape and say, like, what is the feeling? What's the emotion that is leading you to focus in such a perfectionistic way on your work? And then you could say, oh, there's some sort of a fear there. And then you can ask yourself, well, why do I feel this fear? What is the thought that is going through my mind? And then you can say, well, I'm worried that if I send off this email and I make some mistake, I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to make an idiot out of myself in front of the whole company. It makes sense why you're going to be a perfectionist, right? Yeah. You can understand that. So it takes a little bit of that self-awareness to kind of just clue in on what is the process, what is that trickle down effect. And when you have that awareness, then you can, and this is what I train people on, is like, how to ask yourself these powerful questions so that you can find these turnarounds. You can kind of interject something that's more helpful, that's more accurate, that's more likely. And then you can substantially reduce all of the negative outcomes. So that's kind of like the thinking piece of things. The deeper level work, and this is what I would recommend for people who are noticing that they sabotage themselves a lot, that they are stuck in a pattern where no matter how much they've tried, and, you know, people can relate to this, whether it's dieting, right? Where they've tried all the diets and then they never lose the weight, or like they can't stop smoking, or, you know, they're in some sort of a pattern, whatever it is, right? They have low self-esteem or whatever it is. That really comes down, as you said before, to your subconscious mind. And that usually stems from those early life experiences. So typically what I explain is that when we develop our belief system, it's usually before the age of 7, right? So our brain isn't fully developed. So think about a child who's 3 or 5, right? And they're kind of home and they're seeing all this stuff happening in their house, or they're at school, or they're with their friends. And they don't really have a full understanding of how the world works yet. And developmentally, they're in that place where they think everything revolves around them. Right? I am the center of the universe. So if mom is happy, it means I'm a good girl. And if mom is upset, it means I'm a bad girl and there's something wrong with me. Right. And so we're making everything about us, even when it's not, because that's just where we are at that stage of life.
Yeah.
And so we have these formative years where we're doing all this kind of misinterpretation, and we come up with these beliefs. And the belief, if you think about it, it's really just a thought that you've had over and over again, and it becomes cemented. And basically that is your programming. So programming, if you've heard that word, it's basically a message or a thought, right, that you have heard either from others or you've told yourself enough times that your subconscious mind, which is your computer, has latched onto. And your subconscious mind's job is to be efficient. Right. So it's like I tell people, it doesn't have an opinion. It doesn't care what program you feed it. It's just there to serve you. Yes. So if you tell it something over and over again, then it thinks like that's the program that you want it to run. So it's like, cool, I totally got this. I will do that for you. And it just runs on autopilot. And what that means is that you don't even think about it. It's not a conscious process. Right. And that's why it's so hard for people to break out of self-sabotage, because it's not like a rational thing that you can just like make a switch. And so we need to reprogram the mind. And what that means is that you've got to now create new programs, new messages to alter the beliefs so that everything that you do is now a result of a new automatic process that actually works for you rather than against you.
Well, what's interesting too is that these first programs were often there to protect us, or to protect, you know, our ego, right? And it's like when we're reprogramming, and I have a question on that too, it's going to do the same, but it's going to work in the direction of working for us today, because the old program was maybe fabulous then. It might have saved our life, you know, but right now it doesn't serve us. Right? To be the good little girl or the perfectionist or whatever that was necessary right now is hampering us. So how do you, I mean, so now we're talking again, consciously exploring an emotion and a belief, which we then have a story about, etc. But how are you switching that knowledge to the new program when you know that this is a sabotaging limited belief, and if I keep going this way, I know the results, right? Because, you know, I've repeated it a million times, etc. So what's the, you know, because I know there's all kinds of things on the market, but, and I love the way you explain so succinctly what that unconscious belief system is. But how do you reprogram in simple words? Like, can you explain a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, the essence of it is, if you think about how we got the original program, is, as I said, it was something that you heard over and over again. And that's essentially what creates a program in your brain, right? Mm-hmm. It's like your subconscious mind's always listening. And when it hears something a lot, then it becomes a mind habit. And the way that I like to have people think about this is, when you create a regular habit, a behavioral habit, it's something that you have to do over and over again, right? So I tell people, like, you weren't born brushing your teeth. You didn't like come out of the womb with a toothbrush and be like, okay, this is what I do every morning, right? It's something that was taught. You had to practice it, and you probably forgot to do it, or you had to have your parent remind you. But you got into this like sequence where you were doing it every single day, and you did it at the same time every day. You either did it first thing when you woke up, or you did it right after breakfast, and you do it before bed. Like, we have these very like exact times that we do this behavior. And so now, after all these years, you're in this routine where you don't have to think about it. You just roll out of bed, and that's what you do. It's automated. And so that's how habits are created, right? We do something over and over again. And then it comes to the point where I don't have to really remember to do it. It just like something that's easy for me. And it's kind of like when you first learn to drive, and you're just like, oh my God, I have to focus on the blinker and the mirror and to look and to signal. And oh my God, like, it's overwhelming. And now you get in your car and you get to your destination, and you don't even remember how you got there. It's like everything's so automated, right? And the same thing happens with your beliefs. So if you think something a million times, it becomes cemented in your subconscious mind, and then it feels true. You don't question it, and it starts to kind of drive everything, right?
Right. So what you're, correct me if I'm not getting what you're saying, but if so we're replacing because the brain doesn't know the difference on if it's true or not true. So the idea is you're replacing with, how do you know that it replaces the self-sabotaging thoughts? So for example, that's specifically my question.
Yes. I was going to get to that.
Oh, okay. I'll let you go with that. Yeah.
No, so that's perfect. So I was just explaining kind of like what leads up to that original, but then you can use that same formula to create the new program. You basically need that same consistent repetition over time. And that creates that new mind habit. And so what that means is that what I do with my clients, part of what I do is I'll elicit from them all the negative thoughts, all the negative behaviors, all the negative emotions, all the things they tell me. Right. And then we have them turn it around. So then, instead of saying like, I'm a loser, I'll say to them, how do you want to think about yourself? How do you want to feel? What do you want to do? Ideally, if you could have your like ideal scenario, right? If you weren't in this place where you really believed it. And so we come up with all these turnarounds. And then I'll go and I'll like read it all back to them. And I'm like, I want you to just close your eyes and just like hear this. Right. And tell me how that feels in your body, right? Like, what is it like to hear this? Like, as if it's true. And people usually have one of two responses to that. Either it feels amazing and it's like so much lighter, right? Because all the negative thoughts are like heavy. There's this like lightening of your load, if you will. And so there's that. And then the other response is, it just doesn't feel true.
Right.
It doesn't feel true. And I say, well, that's exactly the point, because you're not there yet.
Yeah.
We're just identifying where you want to be. And now we have to get you there. Right. So it makes sense that, I mean, obviously, if it was true, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Right. And so we have to identify what the turnarounds are. And then what we do is we'll create a recording where they can listen to it over and over again. And that's that repetition. So all I ask them is to stay consistent. right? I'll say to them, it takes at least 3 weeks to create a habit. And if you want this to really work and you want to, really expedite this process, you want to commit to listening to your recording for at least 15 minutes. And if you could do it 2 to 3 times a day, that would be great. And what I tell them, because I work with high achievers, so I know everybody's like strapped for time. I said, this is not taking an additional time out of your day. Okay. You're doing this while you're doing other things. Mm-hmm. So while you're, brushing your teeth and getting dressed and doing or showering, this is something you can have in the background. And when you're cooking dinner, this is something you can have in the background. And when you're taking your dog for a walk, you put it on, your headphones, and this is what you listen to. So it's not about taking more time out of your day. And I'm very intentional about the strategies that I provide people, because I know people aren't going to do it if it takes more time, or if it takes too much energy, if it takes, like people are already feeling overwhelmed with all the things that they have. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like this works really well because they don't have to sacrifice anything. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if they're consistent, they start to see the results, and it just starts to blow their mind. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe that I've spent my whole life with this, and now it's only been like X number of days and I'm already here, And so when people see that there's like this quick turnaround, and this is the other thing I tell people, like, yes, I'm asking you to do this 2-3 times a day, but it's not forever. It's just until we have the program kind of set, and then you don't have to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's already in there. Once the program is set, you're just on autopilot. It's just a different kind of program. It's the program that works for you rather than against you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So I just need that initial commitment.
Right. Yeah. And I guess it self-selects itself to replace a negative program.
Yeah. And what my clients also report is that, at least in the early stages, like before they get to that 3-week mark, mm-hmm. kind of like in between, they're just a lot more mindful about their self-chatter. So all of a sudden, all this subconscious stuff that you were telling yourself has become more conscious. It's kind of risen up where you're noticing, because you are still hearing all the negative things that you always told yourself. At the same time, you're practicing your positive statements. So now there's like some counterbalance there where you're like, I hear this, but one of my clients put it this way. She's like, we're not doing that now. Right. This is what she tells herself when the negative statement comes. She's like, we're not doing that now. Right. So she's able to intervene. Whereas before, it just felt like it was happening to her. And, you don't feel like you have control, or you're not even conscious of it. Like, it's just, you're feeling the effects of it. You don't know how you got there. So this really starts to turn things around, and it happens really quickly. And so people can be like, just have quick results. And that's really what I want for my clients, and why I kind of came into the coaching world, is because I want to give people transformational results in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, our time this has been great, and our time's almost up here. And I just wanted to mention you have, it's a 7-day burnout challenge. Is that the same as the 7E solution, or are they two different programs that you have?
Well, I actually created the free 7-day challenge based on the 7E solution that I wrote about in my book. So basically every day I'm taking them through, it's kind of like an introduction to each one of the 7Es. And they get an email that has a link to a video. And so in that video, I'm explaining about the concepts, and then I give them an assignment, because the idea is you don't want to just get the information, you actually want to implement and see how it applies to you. And so I give them like a homework assignment. And so there's some sort of an exercise, and they do this for the course of 7 days. And so that takes them through all of the 7Es. And it's just like a more practical application for, some people like to read the book and they'll get like all the exercise. There's a lot more in there than just like what's in the challenge, but this is just like a really quick and dirty because it only requires about 15 minutes of your time between watching the video and doing the exercise. And it's only a week, and then you're kind of on the other side. So I love to gift that to people just to kind of get them started and get them introduced to all the concepts and what's possible.
Okay, well, we'll definitely put that at the bottom of our interview. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Sharon Grossman, for coming on this show. And I think it's been really nice information to share in a very timely time.
Well, thank you again so much for having me. And I'm just excited to share these messages with your listeners.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café with Dr. Manon. For more information, go to drmanonbolliger.com.